There's a place He comes to me. Though I'm blind, He helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see Him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Acts. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store. Paul here, he had a promise to see Rome, but he still lost his hope. Where the surviving of these storms or these types of trials in life, they have nothing to do with us, where survival has nothing to do with our faith. Because the only way to get through these storms is that God brings us through them, where it's not our faith, but it's God's faithfulness. Where it's not that we have such a grip on God, but that God has His grip on us. And you have to see here, none of this is because Paul is in any kind of disobedience. It's not like he's running away from God's will. He desires God's will. So it's not like he's backslidden. But the fact is that Paul here, that he's in the middle of God's will, and God has not only allowed this, but God, He's still the one who's in control here, and He's guiding the ship. And so you might ask, well, why does God allow this if we're being obedient to God and if we're walking in His will? And that's because what we learn here are these priceless things about God through these storms that we can learn in no other way. Where these kind of storms in our lives, they can be anything. They can be things like a broken marriage. They can be things like your health or your children. They're storms where you see no hope, where you know that you will not survive it. But God, He uses these storms in our lives to give us character, perseverance, and a humility. It gives us a depth of relationship with our commitment to God. And we learn to be more caring of other people and more sympathetic than we ever have before. Because the truth is, in these storms, we do make it, though we never thought we would. And it's not because we have a grip on God or our faith. It's because we learn that God, He has a grip on us, where these kind of storms, they purify our faith. All right, so Romans 5:3. But we also glory in tribulations, knowing that our tribulation produces perseverance, and perseverance, character, and character, hope. Where Paul here, he has even lost his hope because he feels that God's absent. But the storm here, it doesn't get the final word. God does. Where sometimes it might feel like we've been abandoned by God, but it's actually the opposite. And so here are a couple of scriptures that remind us of God's faithfulness to us, with one being Philippians 1:6. Being confident of this very thing, that He who has begun a good work in you will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ. And that's what Paul wrote to the Philippian church. But you have to realize that he only wrote that after he went through this storm, because that letter was written when he was imprisoned in Rome. And so you have to think, where do you think he learned that from? And then you have 2 Timothy 2:13, where it says, if we are faithless, He remains faithful. He cannot deny Himself. Where you learn that none of God's deliverances, they've ever depended on our faith. They've always been dependent on God's faithfulness. He's the one who gets us through the storms. So we bring nothing to the table. It has nothing to do with our faith, but it has all to do with God's faithfulness. And it doesn't even matter if we believe these promises, because God, He believes these promises. He does. And so Paul, then he tells his I told you so. So he has his I told you so moment. And I don't know if this is really such a great time for Paul to say to all these perishing people that I told you so. But what it seems that he's saying here to these people when he says, men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete. What he's saying is that you should have listened to me then, but I'm only bringing that up so that you will listen to me now. Because if they listen to Paul now, there will be no loss of life, but only of the ship. Where we see here in Paul's hopelessness, God sent Paul an angel to encourage him. Where the very first thing that this angel says to Paul is, do not be afraid. And that's because Paul too, he had lost all his hope. And Paul, he was very afraid. And then this angel encourages Paul by reminding Paul of what Jesus actually said to Paul. You must be brought before Caesar. And then that angel, he tells Paul that God is going to answer your prayer, that God has granted you all those who sail with you. So all these people that Paul has been interceding for, they're all going to be saved. And then Paul said, therefore, which means because of what all the angels said there, he says to them, he says, take heart. And then Paul, he gives them the bad news, where Paul tells them what will happen. And this is a prophetic word because it really does come to pass, where they will be shipwrecked and they will run aground on a certain island, but they're not told the name of the island here. And so it doesn't seem like it here, but God, he is directing the ship. But even after Paul's encouraging words, this storm, it doesn't end, because we read here that it says the 14th night, but then something happens to change, where they're taking these soundings and then they're finding out that they're approaching land way too quickly. And so they drop 4 anchors to slow them down before they hit the rocks. And then some of the sailors, they try to steal that skiff, which means it's because of their unbelief. But then they're told that all hands were needed for them to survive. So Paul tells the centurion, and you can see here that Julius, he's starting to believe Paul, where he has the ropes cut that are holding the skiff. That all happened at the night. But when morning comes, Paul, he encourages everyone to eat something, because these guys, they haven't eaten anything in 2 weeks, and they're going to need their strength. And then he tells them again that they're all going to survive. And then he gives thanks and he breaks the bread in the Jewish custom. And then with all of them believing Paul, they throw the rest of the grain into the sea to lighten the ship. Then they see the land and a beach, and they don't know where they are, but now they're going to make their final attempt to make it to that beach. And so they let go of those 4 anchors, and at the same time, they raise the sails to try to get enough speed to drive the ship into the ground. And it worked, but the ship, it didn't make it to shore, but it was caught on the rocks and became unmovable. And we're told that it's where 2 seas meet. So there's these 2 seas that are battling it out, where now these waves are breaking the ship apart. And all they can do is jump ship and try to make it to land. And so now you got the soldiers, and they come up with their plan to kill all the prisoners on board, because they know that if any of them escape their guard, they're going to suffer the same consequences as their prisoner. And you have to remember that all of these prisoners, except for Paul, are to be executed. But because the centurion in charge, because he's become Paul's friend, he wants to save Paul. And so he doesn't allow it, and he finds parts of the ship to be used as floats for those who can't swim. And so he does all of those things at risk to himself, and they all make it. And now this shipwreck, we know that this shipwreck, it occurred in November. And then they find out that this island is Malta, which is a small island off of Sicily, where that name Malta, it actually means refuge. And that place that they landed in Malta today is called St. Paul's Bay. And then we have verse 2, and it says, natives showed us unusual kindness. But in the old King James, the word used for natives is barbarians. But you really kind of don't want to think of these islanders as these half-dressed natives, this wild bunch like in the South Pacific Islands. because these people were civilized. They are a part of the Roman Empire. And the only reasons they're called barbarians is because they don't speak Greek. Were Greeks, they called anybody who didn't speak Greek a barbarian. They thought their language was so beautiful that anything anybody else spoke sounded like bar, 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 bar. So they kind of thought it sounded like French, And I don't know if you've ever seen that episode about Joey speaking French, but this is what I picture. It tells us that these Maltese people, that they're really showing this unusual kindness, because you have to realize it's not every day you see 276 people walking out of the seas, and they're not only wet from the sea, but they're also wet from the rains, and they're all convicted criminals and soldiers. Were these natives, instead of being suspicious of them, they welcome them and they make a fire to warm them up to dry off, where they've put everything else aside and they take care of their human needs first. And the first thing that you see the Apostle Paul do when he gets to shore is he starts serving, where he starts gathering sticks for the fire. Where you see that Paul, he is a servant, where he doesn't think of himself as being too important at all to do kind of menial work. And then he's feeding the fire when the heat wakes up this poisonous viper that attaches himself to Paul's hand. And everybody, they see that viper and they see it hanging down off his hand. So nobody in anyone's mind here doesn't believe that that viper has broken the skin, that its venom is going into Paul's blood. And so now they're just all waiting for Paul to swell up and drop dead, with all these native people saying, "No doubt this man's a murderer. Though he's escaped the sea, yet justice does not allow it to live." Where that is actually a Maltese saying, yet justice does not allow to live. Where what they're actually referring to there is the Greek goddess of justice, who they called Dike. Because these islanders, they know that Paul is a prisoner, but they're assuming that Paul committed some kind of great crime where he's not to go unpunished. But Paul, he just shakes off that viper into the fire and he goes on as if nothing ever happened. And so after a little while, they all change their mind about Paul. And so now he's not a murderer, but now he's a god, which isn't the first time that the pagans made Paul out to be a god. But this time they're not trying to sacrifice to him. And this gives Paul the opportunity to be entertained by Publius, who is the leading citizen, which is a technical term for a person who represented Rome on the island. And it says that Publius entertained them for 3 days, which is quite generous. Because the way that this reads, it means that all 276 of them were entertained by Publius. And Paul, he laid his hand and prayed for Publius's father, who had dysentery, which what some people believe was called Malta fever, which is caused by drinking impure goat's milk. And then after that, and after he was healed, all the sick were brought to Paul, and they were all healed. But the word for healed here, it's not our typical word for healed, where this word literally means to receive medical attention.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.